Hello everyone and welcome to Unboxing Umbraco 12. Yes, that's right. We've got a brand new major release available for Umbraco running on .NET 7 and ASP.NET Core 7. We've got a couple of really big, cool new features and things we support in the release. Got some updated dependencies, new documentation, ton of great things. And to help me have a look at these things, I've invited a couple of the developers from the CMS team. Ken Jacobsen is joining us and Nikolai Geisler as well. Hello, gents, and thanks for joining.
Hello.
And let's just start by having a little look at the release blog post that's out. And that's kind of a good guide to everything that's in the release, funnily enough. So if you jump over to the blog, you can have a full read through of all the new wonderful things you'll get in Umbraco 12. And I think we should just take it from the top. First release feature on the list here is support for headless capabilities directly in Umbraco Core via something called the Content Delivery API. And I believe you have a thing or two to say about that, Ken.
I really do. It's a super awesome feature that we've been working on for a while, and we're pretty darn satisfied with the result. So let's have a quick look at what this is. I will share here. So first and foremost, it's important to note that the API is something you opt into explicitly. We're not going to be leaking all your content by means of an API that all of a sudden is installed in your Umbraco installation. If you're upgrading from 10, 11, whatever, then you have to add an extra line to your startup CS in order to even remotely turn this thing on, that is. But on top of that, you also have to explicitly enable the API in your settings. Here I've also entered an API key, which we'll get back to later, but it relates to preview or even locking down the public access to this. So speaking of public access, when you enable the API, it is public by default. You can turn it off by configuration. You can also go ahead and say certain content types should never ever be permitted as output through this API, no matter how public it is. So you have a settings node with all your secrets in it within Umbraco. Shame on you. Then this this is a way for you to avoid that being leaked by accident. And finally, we have a feature of outputting the RTE content as JSON rather than HTML. Might be easier for some channels to consume JSON, a representation of markup.
Yeah, and that'll be across the board then that it's outputted as JSON.
Yes, it will be. I mean, this is a global setting, but this is only for the delivery API. So if you apply this setting, it only applies to the delivery API, not to Razor rendering, etc.
Nice.
Those are completely separate.
Yeah, cool.
Yes, so that's awesome. So to demo this, I've created a sort of simplistic content setup. Here we have a blog post with some posts, some authors. The authors only really have a picture. The posts have various properties here, including a link to an author, an image, etc., etc. So this is the content model that we're using to demo this feature. The feature itself is documented in Swagger, so we're now shipping Swagger as part of Umbraco. And the very first thing you'll see when you enter this is a link to documentation. There is there's a pretty comprehensive guide here to get started with the whole thing. So awesome. If I'm speaking too fast here, you can read through this instead. It should give you sort of the same information. Right. So the API consists of 3 endpoints. 2 of them sort of do the same thing. They can return one single item, either by its routable path or by its key or ID. And the last one is a query endpoint that allows you to query for multiple items. Again, we've been documenting this to an extent at least, so we can try things out without necessarily reading a lot of docs. But let's say we want all the children of our posts root node. Let's grab the posts one, find the ID here. This is the ID of our posts root. Put that in there. And maybe we only want to see those that has an E in their name. And maybe we want to sort by name descending.
Sure.
Go ahead and execute that, and we'll see we'll have a total of 5 posts with what makes a great paper plane as the first one. This sort of resonates with us having 6 posts, but the building a community one does not have an E in the title. So we only have these 5, and what should be the one that sorts on top as its name ascending. All good stuff so far.
I mean, I'll just highlight how good that stuff is, because having this documentation built in,
yeah,
and so you can start trying out queries and debugging before you even get to do client work. It's amazing. It's really cool.
It is pretty cool. So this is the JSON representation of a content item, and we have 5 of them, so they sort of repeat themselves. We can sort of glimpse at what we have. Like we have a name, we have a route for a content item. We have, of course, its ID, the type, it's a post, and we have the properties. So we have the author, we have the image, we have the resume or the excerpt here, and we have the actual content markup. This is an RTE, and since I'm not outputting it as JSON, well, it's encoded as HTML. Yes. So other interesting stuff for this endpoint is pagination, of course. So while we have 5 total items, maybe we could skip the first 2 and take 2 of them only. Again, if we go ahead and execute that, we'll still have a total of 5 because the entire result set is still 5 items, but we're only getting 2 of them. So now we start with put your heart into it, because the 2 first ones are sorted out and filtered out, and we only have 2 items in total. So pagination is built in. And the rest of the
is there a place to get, so you've kind of selected the query here. Is there a place to get the full query if you wanted to copy paste that into a piece of code?
It's actually
right
of
here. Course. Yeah.
It's part of the Swagger again.
Yeah.
While we're at this, I would recommend you also try this in Postman, because it sort of makes your life easier. Swagger's great for documentation. Swagger is great for trying out things. Swagger can also be kind of opinionated about some things. For example, language. So we have the option to pass on an accept language header. So if you have multilingual content, you can query by language, of course. If you do not pass an accept language header explicitly, Swagger, by way of the browser, will actually send one for you based on your installed language. So you might actually see weird results going on because you're using Swagger, and that would never happen in Postman. So consider Swagger as a great documentation and trial area, but if you really want to fiddle with this, another tool that's less based on browser technology might be preferable over time, at least.
Fair enough.
So, yeah. So the rest of the parameters, let's skip those for a minute and have a look at the endpoint for getting a single item, because incidentally, it has the same rest of the parameters. So we can go through those here. So this is an endpoint for grabbing a single item by its ID. And in the delivery API, ID is always the key of the item, never the integer ID. So we are consistent across environments. So if we go ahead and grab this piece of content, we can see we have the code coder author and a party image, etc., etc. Hopefully, we go ahead and grab that piece of content, and we'll see our put your heart in it article here with our code coder author, etc.
And it has a reference to the ID for the picked items there. Yeah.
Yes. So when it comes to picked content like an author, we're actually rendering something that looks very similar to the result of the actual item here, but we're collapsing it by default. So the properties collection of the author is empty. You can go ahead and expand it. Say, well, you can expand the author property. execute that, and now the author picture is returned for us as well, because author only has a picture. So if you happen to need some extra data that is part of your linked items, you can consider this instead of having an additional round trip to get that. It's a large trade-off because you'll get a larger response, but you might want to use that trade-off in favor of requesting yet another time. So that's up to you.
But it's nice that it's all collapsed from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
In terms of performance and size of the requests.
Yeah, and there's also a very practical reason for it, because if we just expand and expand and expand, we have something called cyclic references.
Yeah.
So that would be super hard to detect. So by only expanding one level, we never will ever have a cyclic reference. Even though you reference yourself, we still will not have a cyclic reference. So it kind of works out to the best, which is awesome. But this is actually pretty powerful. It does have its merits, at least. Again, we have the accept language for variant stuff. Then we have the API key. As you saw, I defined an API key in my app settings. It's very secret API key. So let's toss that over here. So we can put the API key in here, and that won't really do anything at this point. But if we happen to have some draft content, so this is a draft piece of content. Given my API key and a true in our preview header, we should now be seeing the draft content, just like that.
That's excellent.
Again, go for false. It'll just give us the published one. So preview is built into this by means of a header and an API key. This is meant for server-to-server communication. So the API key is, at this point at least, in the config, and we will expect you to not leak it, because then you're probably in big trouble in your solution, at least. The start item is a concept that I'm not going to spend time explaining here, because it's sort of complicated, but it ties into having multi-site solutions or multiple root items that I happen to have here, actually, but I'm not using it. But there's a very good reason for having the start item when it comes to multiple sites, solutions, and cross-linkage between sites, that you actually have an idea of the context of a given content item.
Yeah. So it's kind of defining the root node for your requests, right?
It is.
Or the scope of your content. Yeah.
If you look at this, you have your put your heart in it post. The path is put your heart in it, and the start item is posts. The author, well, its path is code coder, but the start item is authors. So you can you have an idea of where does it belong?
Yeah.
It'll give you the required context to figure out where, if you're doing multiple sites, is this a cross-site link where I need to apply a different domain to this given path, etc. So in essence, this is what the API is all about. Some extra things worth mentioning is, now we had the fetch, where we get stuff like get the ancestors, children, descendants. We have the filtering, where we have a few built-in ones for content type or by name, and we have some sorting as well. These are fully extendable. So you can roll your own fetchers or selectors, as they're called in code, filters and sorts. And again, it's all documented over here in our extension article. So lots of samples on how you could extend the delivery API, sorting and filtering and selecting.
Nice.
Also worth mentioning that custom properties are supported out of the box. So you don't necessarily have to do anything. If you have a custom value converter, it'll output that value. If you find out that you need to do something specific for the delivery API, well, you can opt into that by implementing this interface. And again, this is documented in this article. So we sort of put in the effort to do some proper documentation for this.
It looks very comprehensive.
Yeah, it is.
Really nice.
I did hear someone say Docksort didn't happen, so I guess this actually did happen. So.
This really did happen. Yeah.
Precisely. And again, the whole stuff about the start item, output expansion, preview, localization, etc. It's all documented in here. Read these concepts because they'll help you understand the reasoning behind the structure and the output that you're seeing. So this is actually we should probably have put a big important label on this part because it's pretty important to understand.
Yeah.
All right. As I said, Umbraco now ships with Swagger from version 12, of course. You can sort of see here, there's also some API versioning going on. So every API is versioned, which means breaking changes will just roll another version moving forward. But it also means that since we're now shipping with both Swagger and API versioning, you might run into some, shall we say, clashes with your current implementation. If you're rolling APIs with Swagger with API versioning, you might not might not be using the same mechanisms as we are, or you might not be using the same ways to do, say, versioning. Unfortunately, we have to apply a lot of these things in a global scope because that's how ASP.NET Core works with OpenAPI, with versioning. So we've made some choices. We've also gone through some hoops to make sure that you can at least amend those choices to a point. So say you want to do versioning by a header value instead of by route, well, you can do that. It's possible. If you want to move the Swagger docs around, you want to create new ones, or you don't want it at Umbraco/Swagger or whatever. All of these things are in this article, so you can tweak how the OpenAPI part and the API version part works without breaking the delivery API. So that's that's good as well.
For sure. So
read through this if you have anything with versioning or with OpenAPI in your current project, because it might affect you when you move to 12. And I guess the last thing to say is that eventually, a few weeks from now, hopefully, we're going to roll out a demo site as well.
Nice.
Based on Next.js, hosted on Vercel, the option to host it on Vercel. This sort of looks like what basically what every other CMS is doing in the headless space, rolling a block. So we will be open sourcing this likely in the Vercel repo, but we'll see. It'll be a few weeks before we can actually submit this pull request. For one, because we actually need 12 to have been available for a little while. But the blog will just be what a blog is, some posts and some more posts and an overview. The cool thing about this is that it will feature preview as well. So now I've entered preview in the blog and we can see our draft content being fed into the blog. So hopefully this will give you a head start, maybe a playground, a way to tinker with the API without having to build a front end yourself, or just to see what you can do with it.
Yeah. Looks really useful. There's no excuse not to get started with this, with all the docs and examples and everything.
We've done our part to make it as easy as possible to get started.
Yeah.
And now it's up to everyone else to try this out.
Yeah. And in terms of that, I think also mentioned in the blog post, of course, some people might ask, well, you're talking a lot of headless in core right now. What does that mean for our other headless offering, which is Umbraco Hardcore, available on Umbraco Cloud? And we can kind of say, well, at the face of it, it doesn't really mean anything. Umbraco Hardcore is a SaaS offering that has a layer of extra features on top of a delivery API. But we can then also say that the work being done on the content delivery API has been aligned with the Hardcore team and will also feed back into Hardcore. So it'll be similar concepts you're working with, whether you're working in a cloud project, on-premise CMS, or Umbraco Hardcore, in terms of headless at least.
Exactly. So So, and I'll actually go one step further, because Hardcore, or the Hardcore team, wrote the initial specification for this API, which we followed. And this is going to be, well, Hardcore is going to build the same API. Currently, it's slated for version 3 of the REST API. I have no idea when that is, but it will be the same API. So this means you're basically extending your toolbox with different offering options by being able to use the same API on both the CMS and in Hardcore.
Yeah. And both products can kind of feed into each other in terms of fixes and features and all of this stuff, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you for that, Ken.
You're most welcome. I'll just stop sharing.
Sure thing. I'll just grab the screen for 2 seconds. And we can scroll a bit down. As you can see, you can read quite a lot about kind of the overall approach and idea behind the content delivery API in the blog post. There's links to documentation. We discuss a bit about Hardcore here as well. And then at the bottom of the post, you can also find a link to the release candidate, which has a bit more technical detail as well. But as we saw, there's plenty of documentation to dive into. So I'd probably say go there if you want to figure out more about the features and technical stuff behind it.
Yes.
So that brings us to the next feature in Umbraco 12, and this is also a really exciting one. This is actually something I've heard the name Entity Framework being mentioned for many years on the Umbraco forum, on the issue tracker, and things like that. And actually, back from when we were on .NET Framework, and it was just called Entity Framework, but now we're on .NET Core. So Entity Framework Core is now something that is supported to a certain extent, let's say initially here. But Nikolai, maybe you can talk us through it and show us a bit about how this works.
Yeah. So it's actually a feature I'm very excited about personally, because when I started studying as a developer, that's the only thing we ever used. We didn't have or heard about in Pogo. We actually used EF Core, so I was very surprised when I got out in the real world. Where's my EF Core?
Can you for the uninitiated, can you maybe just quickly describe what EF Core does? Why is it great as a developer?
Yeah. So what EF Core is I can't remember the word, but it's basically mapping all your SQL over to C# objects instead, so you can work with C# objects instead of knowing raw SQL, which is great for someone like me who especially when you are new, you don't really know all the raw SQL queries and how to work with it, but you can just use EF Core instead.
Yeah. I really say it's a productivity enhancer for .NET developers that want to work with custom data, right? And
yes.
And yeah, it's really awesome to see it starting to creep into the CMS a little bit.
So awesome. Now in Umbraco we have CMS support or EF Core support for you to use it. So I thought I'd demo a little bit about how you'd use it. You can also, if you forget again what I do, there's a tutorial on the docs page. Again, docs, so it didn't happen, right? So so you can follow this tutorial along on your docs. But basically, what I've created here is a class. It's just a blog comment class that has a blog post Umbraco key, because we can pretend this is a blog post, and then just your name, your email, what website you're from, and maybe a message on a comment somewhere. So what you will need is a DB context. This is what we'll be working with when you're accessing your database, and what we're doing here is just we're saying this table exists, and we are mapping it over to entities in the database. So what you need to use it is you'll need to register this EF Core context with we have our own extension methods that are called add Umbraco EF Core context, and then with your own block context here. And then you need to pass in a connection string in a provider. So we need to know what kind of provider do you have, and you can actually just steal that from your own app settings.json. If you have Umbraco installed, you can see I've just copied mine directly from the Umbraco DDSN and the provider name right here. So now you have your if context. So now we need to migrate the database. So right now, if we take a look at our database, we have 60 tables, but we don't have our block comments table, right? We haven't created that yet. So in if call, we have a concept called migrations, and you can run this command right here, .NET if migrations. You're adding a migration called initial create. That's the name of it. And you're saying what context this is for. It's for my block context. So this will auto create all these migrations for you, and you can actually see it here, what it will do, create the block comment table, and then with all your columns here. But
Very
then
nice.
We also need to run that migration, right? It's great to have the migrations, but we also need to run them. and I've just made a simple notification handler here. So this will run when we start our Umbraco application. It will just get I've just injected our block context just with normal dependency injection as you would, and you can then just get your pending migrations, and if there are any, we can migrate them. So let's try running that. And now we wait for the build, of course. Luckily, my computer is pretty fast, and we can even set a breakpoint right here just to make sure. Oh, that was actually too slow. But now, if we refresh our database, you can actually see we get two tables. We had 60 before, and now we have 62. And we get our block comments table, but we also get this migration history. So this will be a history of all the migrations you've run. That's just a EF core concept. And then we of course have our block comment table, and it's pretty empty right now. But I thought we could also try to insert some. So I've made just a normal controller here, and I will be using Postman. I will not be using Swagger. So let's try that out as well. So here I've just made a simple insert comment, and here you can actually see how I'm using this new concept. So in Umbraco we have the scope provider concept, and here we've actually made an IEF core scope provider instead, which can create your scopes for you. So you will inject that. And then down here, you will create your scope and then use it as a using, of course, because we need to dispose it afterwards. Then you can actually execute your command with the execute with context, pass in DB here as a function, and then you can actually get access to your context here. So here's the block context, and then now we're working with it as C# objects, right? So we're saying this is the block comments table, and then we're just adding it just as you would as a normal list property or whatever. You're just adding this comment right here, and then we're just saving the changes, and then completing the scope, and that will actually complete the transaction. And that is the crux of this. That now you can use your scopes like this, and if we didn't complete the scope, it would actually roll back the transaction. And this will also work with Umbraco services. So you could imagine if you had more complex use cases, you would also be using Umbraco services when you're creating, updating, etc. Yeah. And then if you didn't create if you didn't complete your scope, let's say you had an exception or something, it will actually roll both your changes back to your EF core context, but also in the Umbraco services. So that works as well. So let's try creating this block comment. I've just made a simple one here with an EF core rocks email, of course. And then we can try getting them. And yeah, here is my EF core rocks email. So let's try actually not completing the scope, just to demo that it actually also rolls back. So let's try creating a new one here with a new name, demo name. Put in an email, totally not a test, add email, and I will just leave the website as an extra. Awesome, and I really for here. And then let's just set a breakpoint here, just so we make sure we actually hit it, and we do, and we also get in here, we add our comment, and we save our changes. And remember, we do save our changes here. Yeah. But if I then F5 and then try to get all the comments, you can actually see I still have one, even though we did save changes. But that is again because we have our scope here overriding it, and it's saying you are not completing the scope. That means we have to roll back the transactions, even though we did our save changes. So we'll still roll it back for you.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yep.
That can save a lot of hair pulling and worries later.
Yeah,
so it's really awesome.
Yeah, and that is really nice that you can work with your EF context and the Umbraco services. I really got to reiterate that because that's the awesome part.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like it was totally impossible to use EF Core together with Umbraco before. It was just a lot more complicated to get going and to make sure that everything worked.
Yes,
well,
and especially
right?
Especially the rollback was really hard, and you had to do your own custom implementations of that before.
Yeah.
And now it's just built in, which is great.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, awesome work. I think that's going to make a lot of people very excited.
Yes.
In terms of EF Core, now we have this kind of initial support, but I know there's some thoughts on expanding this later, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we need it for members later on. But again, we also want to use it ourselves in the future. So we really want to work towards that. It's not in there yet, and it's not going to be there tomorrow. But we really want to work towards that because again, EF Core is just great, and it's the more commonly used, and it's made by Microsoft. So
yeah. It's pretty close to being industry standard, right?
Yeah.
At least in the .NET world. So
yeah.
It makes sense. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that demo. That was awesome. Let's jump back to the blog post and see what else we've got in here. So as always with major releases, it's a very good time to climb up on the hill and take a good view of our dependency landscape and make sure that everything is updated to the latest possible version, including all of the breaking changes that might be in our dependencies. We have a chance to get those in when we do these major upgrades. And there are quite a few dependencies that are updated in this release as well. Again, it's actually quite a small release in terms of the scope, especially in terms of upgrading. It should be relatively easy to upgrade your Umbraco installations, even though it's a major version. But of course, there are some changes that you might want to be aware of. One of the big dependency updates is ImageSharp. It's now in version 3. And James South and the ImageSharp team has done a really good job of both working on performance. There's some really nice security enhancements in there. DDoS protection has been improved, things like that. So a lot of great stuff. I'll make sure to link to the release blog post for ImageSharp as well in the blog post, so you can dive into that if you need to. One thing to be aware of with the ImageSharp release is that it does come with a new license or a split license. So if you are not just using the stuff that Umbraco uses for image processing, but also using the library itself in your code, be aware that there's been some changes to the license, which could mean that you need to actually license the product yourself, and you can't use the license that comes with Umbraco. Yeah, so
it's
that's
probably worth mentioning though that we're still shipping ImageSharp 2 as well as an implementation.
Yeah,
so
good point.
if you cannot live with these license restrictions for one way or another, or one reason or another, you're able to opt into ImageSharp 2. It's not super straightforward, but you can do it. We're able to dual target for Umbraco with both ImageSharp 2 and 3. Yeah,
and it's a really good point, and it can also be for if you need a bit of extra time in order to update things, either to work with ImageSharp 3 or to be able to live up to the licenses. Then you have the option to run ImageSharp 2 for a while longer there. So a really good point, and very nice to have that option in there for sure. As you can see here, there's a list of other dependencies. There's a bunch of .NET dependencies that's been updated, and also The Umbraco UI library has been updated with a bunch of fixes and new components added to that as well. And then, of course, all of our own add-ons are all version 12 from today and forward as well. So that goes for Umbraco Forms, Deploy, and Workflow, all out in new versions. And I mean, as per usual with the major releases, they're mostly releases that aim to work with the new major release of the CMS itself. But there are a couple of things that are worth highlighting. Ken, I think you mentioned that Umbraco Forms has done a bit of work in order to align with the content delivery API, right?
Yeah. So Forms already has a headless API for form submissions. But the Forms teams are aligning more with the delivery API, making sure that they're using the same dependencies, they're doing things in sort of the same way. So the underlying tech, for starters, have been sort of nudged in the way of the delivery API, so we're not shipping multiple dependencies that more or less do the same thing. And especially for Forms, we've also seen Forms pick up on the delivery API specifically, so they're tailoring the output of the Forms picker to the delivery API. We have the option to do more stuff with that than just getting a Forms key and then subsequently having to re-request the form from an API. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, and for Deploy, there's also been quite a lot of work done in terms of performance in that release. So, and that'll certainly also be very interesting for all of the projects on Umbraco Cloud that are running the new version, and of course people using Deploy on premises as well. I think it's like up to 50% performance enhancements for some of the deployment operations and content transfers. So that's pretty exciting as well. And I think it's worth mentioning, last line, next week is another release week for us. We're actually adding a new product to our portfolio. Umbraco Commerce is coming out. The artist formerly known as Vendor. And that's a really exciting release. And to kind of tie a nice little, or wrap everything up nicely, we can also say that for Umbraco Commerce, this is again with full support for Umbraco 12, and then in the not too distant future, there'll be headless capabilities added to Umbraco Commerce, aligned with the content delivery API, of course, and so forth. So really exciting stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, and I guess that pretty much wraps it up for the release. Umbraco 12 is out. Get it on NuGet, go to your Umbraco Cloud portal, click Create Project, and then you can select Umbraco 12. You can take a trial on Umbraco Cloud as well. That'll give you a project that's running on the latest version. In the article here, you can dive into all of the wonderful documentation, so you can verify that it did actually happen. And I think the last thing to say is a huge thank you to the contributors to the release. As you can see, it's a major release. It's mainly been us tinkering with it, but we do have some really nice PRs in the release as well. So thank you to Nuklon and Danesh, and a big shout out to Carl Macklin for his first time pull request to the CMS as well. It's really awesome. Yeah, I think that just about covers it.
Awesome.
Any last words?
Have fun.
Go try it out.
It's a really, really cool release. We're pretty excited about it. So go try it out. It's going to be so nice to see what you do with it, and and get some feedback on these features, so we can build more awesome stuff around them.
Yeah. I mean, we can safely say that in 6 weeks there'll be updates to Umbraco 12. So send us your feedback, and then we'll see what happens in the upcoming minors.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks to both of you for really, really great demos, and for really great work on the features as well. And
Thanks
to everyone out there, Have fun with Umbraco 12 and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.